In the 5th century BC, the Persian Empire stood as the greatest political and military power the world had ever seen, possessing the vastest territories of its time and housing approximately 1/5 of the world's population. This immense empire stretched from modern Pakistan to Macedonia. Distinguished by its advanced infrastructure, economic prosperity, and policies of conquest, the empire launched a massive campaign in 480 BC under the leadership of the great King Xerxes against Greece, a collection of independent small city-states located on its western frontiers. Xerxes intended to punish the Greeks who had dared to meddle in the affairs of the Persian Empire. However, although this enterprise began as a quest for vengeance, conquest, and glory, it would ultimately result only in disaster and death. This period, known as the Greco-Persian Wars, has reached us primarily through the writings of the historian Herodotus of Halicarnassus. About 30 years after the events, Herodotus began writing his Historiae, the Inquiries, to examine the origins and course of the conflict. Like many of his contemporaries, Herodotus believed in omens and divine intervention. Yet he also argued that individuals could shape their own destinies. Accordingly, he traveled across the lands of Greece and the Persian Empire, studied inscriptions and records, interviewed local peoples, and evaluated the information he gathered with a critical and analytical approach. For these qualities, the Roman orator Cicero bestowed upon him the title, the Father of History. Herodotus's narrative traces the roots of this conflict between the Greeks and Persians back to the 6th century BC, when King Cyrus the Great brought the Greek cities of western Anatolia under Persian rule. However, in 499 BC, these cities rebelled, and their calls for aid were answered by Athens and Eretria. Although the Greek city-state's capture of Sardis and the burning of the temple of the goddess Cybele seemed a significant military success, the Persians were not slow to respond. As a result of struggles lasting 14 years, the rebellion was completely quelled. In 490 BC, a campaign delegation was organized by order of the Persian king Darius, and envoys were sent to many states in Greece demanding acceptance of Persian sovereignty. While some city-states bowed to this demand, Athens and Sparta fiercely rejected the offer. Throwing the envoys into a well, these cities declared that the Persians would find the earth and water they required down there. In the face of this defiance, Darius's mighty army launched an assault on Greece. The island state of Naxos surrendered, and Eretria was sacked. However, at the Battle of Marathon, soldiers from Athens and its ally Plataea defeated the numerically superior Persian army. Following Darius's death, his son Xerxes assumed the task of avenging his father's defeat at the hands of Athens. Under Xerxes, the Persians gathered soldiers from all corners of the empire to form a colossal invasion force and achieved passage from Asia into Europe via a bridge constructed of ships across the Hellespont. Although Herodotus states the army's size as 2.3 million men, modern historians believe this number was likely at most 200,000. Additionally, a massive fleet consisting of over 1,000 ships from Persian vassal states in the eastern Mediterranean accompanied the land forces. Greece initially appeared to be an easy target. Its many independent city-states were notorious for their constant internal strife. However, in the face of the Persian threat, 31 states set aside their differences and convened a council of war at the Isthmus of Corinth to plan the defense of Greece. These states were later commemorated on the giant serpent column at the Greeks' most sacred site, Delphi. At the top of the list were the Spartans, also known as the Lacedaemonians, followed by the Athenians and the Corinthians. Anticipating that the Persians would invade from the north, the Greeks sent 10,000 soldiers to defend a mountain pass at Tempe near Mount Olympus. However, upon arriving, the troops realized the position could be easily outflanked by the enemy. Furthermore, unable to trust the loyalty of Thessaly to their rear, they were forced to withdraw from this position. Instead, a force of 7,000 men led by the Spartan king Leonidas decided to make a stand at Thermopylae. Simultaneously, the Greek navy was deployed to Artemisium to guard against threats from the sea. However, this fleet, much like the alliance itself, was not in total harmony. It was an uneasy coalition composed of ships from city-states like Athens and Aegina that had previously been in conflict. The Athenians constituted the fleet's greatest strength. This powerful naval force was only made possible by the discovery of rich silver mines in the Laurium region just 3 years prior. It had taken the foresight of the Athenian statesman and general Themistocles to persuade the people to forego sharing this unexpected wealth as cash handouts and instead invest it in establishing a navy for their future security. Thus, a fleet of 200 triremes was built, and for the Athenians, this historical decision became the turning point that would save Greece. However, the other Greek city-states had limited trust in Athens. They categorically refused to serve under the command of an Athenian admiral. Therefore, Themistocles tactfully agreed to the appointment of a Spartan, Eurybiades, to lead the fleet, even though the Spartans possessed no expertise in naval warfare. Water droplets splashing from the oars dramatically illustrate the moments when the fleets swept together, plowing through the swell. Bronze rams, with teeth bared, made their power felt in the very heart of the collision. Both the Greek and Persian fleets relied on a single type of vessel that dominated Mediterranean naval warfare, the trireme. Sleek, fast, and agile, this warship carried masts and sails for cruising, but in combat, these were lowered, and the ship relied entirely on the power of 170 rowers pulling in 3 banks. The trireme could reach speeds of approximately 10 knots and used its primary weapon, a bronze-sheathed ram, to smash into the hulls of enemy ships, rendering them disabled. Another tactic was to board and capture the enemy ship. A Greek trireme typically carried 14 marines, 10 hoplites armed with spears and shields, and 4 skilled archers. The commander, or triarch, sat at the stern, coordinating with the kybernetes, helmsman, who guided the ship with twin rudders. A boatswain and a bow officer relayed orders to the oarsmen, while a piper maintained the rhythm to keep the rowers in sync. With a carpenter and 10 sailors, the ship's total complement reached 200 men. Every ship bore a name and was adorned with a painted eye on its prow to ward off bad luck. According to Herodotus, the Greek ships were of a heavier build compared to the Persian triremes, though the exact nature of this difference is unknown. Additionally, the Persian ships carried 44 marines, a number significantly higher than that found on the Greek vessels. While Leonidas and the Greek army mounted their resistance at the pass of Thermopylae, the Persian fleet sailed south along the rugged coastline of Magnesia. However, while at anchor at night, a violent storm broke out. In this disaster, hundreds of ships were wrecked and thousands of sailors lost their lives. According to Herodotus, the Persians sent 200 triremes around the island of Euboea to cut off the Greek retreat, a move that further strained their already weakened fleet. However, this entire operation was reportedly destroyed by yet another storm. Herodotus provides limited details regarding this flanking maneuver, and some historians question whether such an event actually occurred. The Athenians' laying of the foundation stones for freedom was being complemented by these epic encounters at sea.